We are a part of the Mental Health News Radio Network.
You've tuned in to Rescue the Rescuer, the show that focuses on helping first responders who may be experiencing challenges such as addiction, PTSD, relationship failure, and more. We use stories of struggle and recovery to highlight successful survival strategies for those in this powerfully stressful field of work. And now, here's your host, Steven Kavalkovich.
Hey everyone, this is Steven. Thanks for joining me on the show. I'm a former paramedic in long-term recovery from addiction and post-traumatic stress disorder. I've created this podcast to help others who may be experiencing a story similar to mine find a path beyond their problems and towards a life that they deserve. Before we get started with today's episode, let's hear this short message from one of my supporters. I recently read an article that said 81% of Americans would like to become a published author. Chances are you might be one of them, right? I know I am. So what's stopping us? Writing and publishing a book takes a lot of work, can be a pain, and is expensive too, right? Not anymore. For my next book project, I've teamed up with Hassle-Free Books. They're making it easy for me to become an author. They're removing a lot of the fuss and struggle and making it smooth and simple. And it's far more affordable than you could ever imagine. Go to hasslefreebooks.com and use promo code RESCUE to receive a 10% discount off any book project. Get started right away and become a published author in as little as 45 days. That's hasslefreebooks.com. Promo code RESCUE. All right, thanks again for joining me, and let's get started with today's show. Welcome back to Rescue the Rescuer. I am so incredibly excited because this is the very first international interview that we're doing on this show, and I'm so excited because we've crossed international boundaries now, and I've been getting a lot of positive response from a lot of people in the great north of Canada. And since this show has launched, and this is my first opportunity to actually have someone who currently resides there and who is working along the same lines as I am, and it's really excited. So really, without further ado, I'm going to introduce a friend of mine. His name is Nick Halmasy. He is out of Ontario, Canada, and he used to be a firefighter, and he created a Facebook group actually for first responders, free mental health resources for first responders, and it's developed into many, many different things. So I'm going to let him tell you about that. So Nick, welcome to the show. And I want to say aboot once because I've always wanted to say that to a Canadian.
Well, while we're on the terms, I'm glad to open my igloo up to you, and I'm happy that no wall stopped me from getting through to you.
That's right, man. It's so cool. It's so cool. It really is. No matter what walls Trump decides to put up, we don't have to worry about that. Yeah, we did go political for a second, and I don't really care. So Nick, tell me a little bit about yourself. What made let's try to backtrack a little bit. So you were a volunteer firefighter for 10 years up there.
Yep.
And how did that translate into you getting into the advocacy work for mental health for first responders? How did that work?
Yeah, I mean, if I go back to the very, very beginning, so I got into fire when I was 18. So, lots of life experience at that age. So I got in at 18 as kind of a lost dog. I had dropped out of college. So the equivalent of, I guess, of your community college down there, and fell into fire, and I stayed in it for 10 years. So throughout that, probably around, while I was in fire, about probably 4 or 5 years in, I became fire instructor and started doing that. So I started really enjoying being in front of the classroom. And I decided that when we're paid on call here, I was going to go career. And so I went back to college to get my EMS certificate. And I ended up in an intro to psych course that I excelled at. And the teacher actually I thank her to this day, pulled me aside, said, listen, I really think you should pursue this at a higher level, and the rest is history. So I went on to get my undergraduate degree in psychology, and then I got my master's degree in counseling psychology. And about the time, so probably around the 8 or 9 year in, I started recognizing that this is something I wanted to do, some advocacy piece. At that time, the PTSD hadn't kind of blown up on the scene yet. So I started a website actually called After the Call. And all the resources, everything was developed by me. It's all peer reviewed, and it's all up there, still up there to this day, that people can go on, grab, take, make their own. I say just use it, make sure it helps you. And from there, as you kind of introduced in the beginning, then I opened up a Facebook group because it's just a bit easier and able to reach out to people better that way. And we started a critical incident stress team here. So I sit as clinical director for that. And, we're busy. So, I guess the rest is history. We can get into it if you want, but that's a bit about me.
So now, did you have any, well, let me ask this. Yeah. The mental health, we'll say stigma, and I hate the word stigma because I think it actually should be replaced with the word discrimination, because it's the same thing. Yeah. And, so I say discrimination. So the mental health discrimination that happens amongst society at large is huge. Especially, I know I've never been out of the country really, except for some trips to the islands, but it's huge in the United States. It's huge, and it's even concentrated way worse amongst first responders because of that nonsense belief that you're supposed to be strong, tough, and suck it up. Yeah. So now let me ask you, what is the climate, so to speak, up in your area, up north, about when it comes to these things?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I want to speak to exactly that point, because there's a couple local magazines down here that I write for on occasion, and I submitted a article on culture, and I got a phone call from the editor back about the reasons why they wouldn't run that article and how culture has changed in Canada. So we just instituted a national plan through the government. So we'll see how effective it is, but national PTSD plan. So all first responder organizations, I believe it might just be fire, but I believe it's all have to institute into their organizations PTSD plan. So they call it a prevention plan. And again, we can get into the bitter disputes I have with that, but we've introduced that nationally. So that same article, though, I submitted to fire engineering and they picked it up. And I think that speaks to what you're getting at. Why maybe you want to use the word discrimination, where I think that here it's more welcome. I think we have more open conversations. I get more and more phone calls from fire chiefs than I thought that I would. And maybe it sounds like some of your other guests that you've had on do. So I think it's welcome, but the pendulum's swinging too far. Again, something we probably can get into. So it's welcomed. There's still some departments certainly that have the old guard kind of ways. I mean, in the fire service, we just started looking at fire suppression, from the UL research, right? We just started looking at how we need to change that now. So I can only imagine how long it's going to be until we have an effective mental health practices. Certainly that's kind of the atmosphere, I think, that, both here and in the States you probably face.
Everything you're saying makes sense. Now you're out of the fire service yourself as an active firefighter, correct?
Yes, I am. Yeah, it's a trigger for me though, so I'm still pretty sore about that. But I say I'm retired, but I always put it in quotation marks because I know I'll go back when things free up.
Now, what do you mean by that? When you say free up, what do you mean by that?
As we started at the beginning of the show, so I work After the Call is a free service that I offer, so I do that kind of on my off time. I'm writing often. I'm going to be rewriting a book that I've put together, and we offer the critical incident debriefings kind of at a whim. And then on top of that, we just launched a fitness section, and I have a family life that I'm reminded that sometimes I need to be around for too. So when all that stuff settles, I'm in my mind, in the perfect world, I'll probably join the fire department again. But I think that's just my way of keeping my foot in the door, because as you know, I can't leave it behind. You know what I mean? It was one of the hardest things I ever did to quit. And it's one of the hardest things that I do to stay out of it right now, is to continuously remind myself that I need some balance.
Well, it's the crazy thing is you said something that, kind of takes me back a little bit, because, I've been I haven't been in a uniform or in an active, ambulance medic unit for multiple years now. Mm-hmm. And some would say to me, well, have you moved on? Why are you still kind of obsessed with first responders? And the bottom line for me is, I know how much I was struggling when my career was coming to an end. And one day I was at work and the next day I was gone, because, and I didn't go into work that night expecting that my career would end that night. It wasn't my plan. It just was how it went down. So I was gone, but for me, it's like, I know how bad it was for me, especially in the end. And I know that there's so many guys out there, men and women, as whether they be dispatchers, firefighters, cops, paramedics, military personnel, any of those people who are suffering because I really want to get into this. So I'm actually going to jump into it before I forget, because I'm going a mile a minute with my thoughts and everything going on, like we talked about before we got on the show. How bad or how major is the drug and substance abuse opiate epidemic up in Canada?
It's significant. So, I actually work as a opiate counselor. That's what I pay my mortgage with. That's the day job that I have, that pays all my bills, because after the call doesn't.
Right.
So, trying to look outside of the echo chamber, right? But it's, Vancouver, really bad right now. And it's coming this way, you know what I mean? It's starting to reach it. It's fentanyl is starting to come into things you would never see it in, right? We're hearing fentanyls in marijuana now, which is, I think, a little bit more accepted here than maybe down there in certain states. But, even into that. So people who have never touched an opiate in their life are getting, hit with it. And, it's bad. And it's a hard field to stay in because the loss is so great,
Yeah. I mean, I had two friends of mine that I knew, both of them died 2 days ago. And one of them just had a baby a month ago.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's, it hits personally, it hits professionally. And the reason I asked that question is because this is kind of a theory that I've developed a little bit, is new people getting into first responder careers are seeing way more death and despair on a grander scale than it was before.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, when you sign up to be a cop or a fireman or whatever, that your job is to go into somebody's worst day. Like, we already accept that. Yeah. However, because of this pandemic that's sweeping not only across the United States, but Canada and everywhere else in the world, that people are seeing it way more. Like, instead of seeing an overdose once a week, they're seeing 10 a day in certain places. Yeah. And that is taking a gigantic toll on the provider.
Yeah.
I don't care who, nobody can argue with me and say that it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's a really important point to make, because one of the glaring questions. So when I do talks, I always talk about kind of the myths of mental health. And one of the things that I know is a real interest of people is when I talk about why some might develop mental wellness issues, and why some won't. Or, maybe if we make it call specific, why somebody's bothered and somebody isn't. And it's, it's hard for me to describe in audio, but essentially, you make an arbitrary line, and every bad call, life event, or otherwise, it goes on, right? Because we want to always blame the job, but we got to look bigger than that to recognize that I come from a home that, crap might be going on in. I might have a side job if I'm a volley or paid on call that, I have crap going on in it. And then I go to one of these bad calls, and, it's often not even the big headliner calls. It's the ones that remind us of our families, or the ones that, we had to work a body or do something like that, where that's the ones that I find for me hit hardest. And a lot of the people I talk to, that's what they say. We're sick of the media portrayal that it's always these big event calls that do it. When in reality, it's that VSA that we went to. It reminded me of mom, or reminded me of my uncle or my dad or something like that. And those are the ones I hear about. So you're absolutely right. And I don't think it's a theory. I think that you are seeing more sick time going. You're seeing more instances of PTSD diagnoses increasing. Suicide rates aren't decreasing despite all these plans. If anything, they're staying the same, but I don't think that they're decreasing despite, like I said, the plans we have in place here or the widespread knowledge of what's going on. And something needs to change. And, it's this cultural, I think there's a large piece of this cultural thing at play still.
Well, when you say culture, you're talking, I assume that you're talking about the culture within the industry, so to speak, because there's this.
Well, actually, you say that, but I think it's split, right? Because we'll talk about culture inside, and like I said, I think we're a bit different here. Now, obviously, I can't speak for every department. I haven't been to them all yet, but majority of them are open to having the conversations, but they're misinformed about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the culture then the culture more widely. So, for instance, we have a WSIB, so our workplace comp program now recognizes PTSD as a workplace injury, so you can get coverage through the government. Well, what's going to happen then is that every first responder that walks through the door that's struggling with any kind of mental wellness problem, be it anxiety, depression, marital issues, what have you, doctor's going to say, oh, you're having nightmares and you're irritable and you're blowing up all the time, you have PTSD, diagnose, and then go to the WSIB. So we created a culture where mental wellness is still shunned. But if you have the worst of the worst, then you're okay, right? Then you're all right. You're still a hardened first responder that can get the support from the government and get the support of the people. When after the call, and my philosophy is we have a whole gamut of mental wellness issues within the field that we need addressing. And if we address some of those, we'll mitigate a lot of the PTSD developing, because people can talk before it becomes the worst case scenario.
You keep saying it, and I'm sure it's because it's common to the language that you use. You say mental wellness issue, and I got to tell you, like, I've heard it before, but it is, to me, it is a total. It's a total flip. It's flipping the script, and I like it because, we say mental illness. Everybody here says mental illness. Even when I talk about my show, I say mental illness related issues.
Right.
And there's a negative moniker to that.
Yeah. Well, mental illness means, to me, right, you have a black and white. That means you're either fully well or fully sick. And as as a therapist, when somebody comes through my door, I say, you have a whole gamut of things that can be going on with your life. Your life could suck and you're just white knuckling it, but you don't have depression, anxiety, or otherwise. So you're not mentally ill, but you're mentally unwell because you're not flourishing, right? Your life isn't going where you want it to go, and you're just kind of making it through. And by showing people that it's on a continuum, that kind of breaks this barrier between, is it bad enough for me to call? Am I sick enough for me to call? Am I a coward if I just have depression, because it's, depression isn't as bad as PTSD, or I'm talking about mental wellness. I'm saying, if anything's going on that's distressing you, that's the time to call. That's the time to reach out, because that could prevent you from having further complications. So I really try hard to change the language, at least when I'm talking, to make it mental wellness, to show that, mental wellness is on a continuum between, languishing fully in some sort of disorder or otherwise, towards mental flourishing, where everything's going well, and I still have areas that I can look at or hash out with folks that help me see me to be a little bit better, or to improve my life. So that's my philosophy behind it, and why I choose to use that language.
I'll tell you, I absolutely love it, and it's actually really given me the I'm going to change my language too, because it's also, I like to draw parallels a lot when I talk about things. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a really strong parallel, because when in traditional substance abuse, someone is labeled an addict,
Right.
Immediately there is a negative tone to that. There's a sense of inferiority that comes with that. There's a sense of shame that comes with that. And I tell people, you're not an addict. You're a human. You're a brother. You're a sister. You're an uncle. You're a grandfather. You're a wife. You're a worker. You're a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things that you are. You're not a behavior, because addiction by nature is behavior based.
Yeah.
So you're not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so powerful, because and this is another question I want to get into is, down here, the prescription will say for substance abuse, the standard model has been for so many years, go to rehab. Right. And then they've, go to rehab. And then here's a meeting list to go to 12-step meetings where you're going to be called an addict for the rest of your life.
Right. Yeah.
And to me, it's insane.
Yeah.
Because you're putting somebody in a box.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought it up, because I wasn't sure if I should or not, but you did, so I will. That the term addict, I think, is really pushed by some of the programs that you talked about, right? Is this idea that I will always be something, and that somewhere down this line, again, where do we draw the line? Is it the time that somebody, took the first oxy orally? Was that when they were an addict, or was it when they snorted it, or was it the first time they banged it? Right? At what point? And then I get into, and then at what point are you not? Because how do you become something, and you do all of this work and you don't touch something for 30 years, but still label yourself that way, when in actual fact, you're just somebody that is found something that's worked for you for a time, but it's no longer working. So you have learned that, if things are going, like if shit's hitting the fan for me, I can reach out and grab this, and the problem will be solved for that short period of time. But what happens is the fallout from that now, right? It's my relationships, it's my health, it's my finances, it's becoming homeless. And so I think, and maybe for your listeners, it'll be hard to hear, but, especially when I'm in the chair, I said, the first thing we need to do is accept the fact that this was working for a time, because that's going to help you accept the fact that you reach for it for a reason. Because we do everything for a reason. And then, so from there, I mean, I forget where I was going with that, but the language addict to me is a problem. And it's, I tell anybody, whatever works for you, do it, but make sure you do more than one thing. Because, you know what I mean? Because if you get labeled that term addict, it's especially in an AA or NA situation, right? So you do 29 days clean and sober, but you have one slip. You know what I mean? They want you to start from day one. And I say, well, you just had 30 days clean, man. Like, which way do you want to look at this?
They say that pain shared is pain lessened. How would you feel if you had someone to unload your burdens with? Someone who has probably felt how you feel and been in your shoes. Someone who wants to help you to manifest dramatic and lasting change in your life. Not only do I host this show and speak around the country, I also do individual coaching and mentoring. I want to help you to climb out of the hole of isolation, despair, and hardship. Contact me at rescuetherescuer.com to set up your free, no-obligation consultation. I'm confident that together we can develop a plan that is tailor-made to you and your goals and purpose. Well, and you hit the nail on the head. Is exactly how I've been really frustrated lately with a lot of this, because they say specifically, they say it in the 12-step fellowships, they say it in treatment centers, they say it in in rehabs and whatnot. They say that alcohol and drugs or gambling or sex or whatever behavior that's become destructive to you is not your problem. It's your symptom. Your problem is yourself.
Right.
Which I agree with. So why does everybody focus so much on how many days you've been symptom free when that's not the problem anyways?
Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't heard it that way, and I like it a lot. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and then to take it another step further, when somebody finds out that you struggled with substance abuse or alcoholism or whatever, and they say, "Well, how many days do you have?" Well, and then another breath later, they'll say it's a day at a time. Well, if it's a day at a time, why does it matter how many days I have?
There's different than the next. Exactly. Yeah.
Like there's so many paradoxes, and to me, and I'd say this all the time, and I think people that hear me talk a lot get sick of hearing me saying it, but I'm not going to stop saying it, is if you've got to go and join a knitting club on Tuesday nights to not destroy your life anymore, then cool, go do that.
Yep.
Like whatever it is. And like you said, do more. Because the other thing is when somebody says, I have substance abuse disorder, or I have PTSD and I want to get sober, or I want to get better. Those are great goals. But if that's the only goal you're striving for in life, you're probably going to keep messing up. You're probably going to keep screwing up because that's not enough.
Yeah.
That's not, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to say this because I think it's important, is I tell people, listen, if you want to get sober, you want to get better from your whatever, wellness issue you're dealing with, whatever it is, if you decide now that you're going to build a life around the purpose and the purpose that you feel and the gifts that you have and the desires and the dreams that you want to chase, the sobriety, the healing, the betterness will be a byproduct of that. We've got it backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say, and I think it comes in line with what you just said here, is, when they sit in my chair and they say, I just wish I could get some days under my belt, or I wish I could just stop using X, whatever it is. I said, that's all good. And, you might be able to do that, but 1 year to 30 years, I see people in this chair because they refuse to look at themselves and look at the reasons behind why reaching for that bottle or reaching for that pill is so much easier than dealing with that emotion that you are feeling. Right. And so, my treatment modalities focus largely on emotion, especially for the first responder friends that we have. We know that it's largely male still. That's just a fact. But even in that culture harbors that kind of cold-heartedness, and it becomes a protective factor for when you have the uniform on, but then you take that home and it becomes an issue at home because you show no emotion and you can't deal with your problems. And, when I take an opiate and I recognize somewhere down that line, especially if I'm prescribed them, because, usually it's from a doctor first, not from the street. Right. But
sure.
I'm prescribed them and I recognize, I have pain in my leg, but, I also felt like shit today and I took this pill and I feel great. Right. And then I've made the connection that my emotion mind and my pain mind are the same. And if I take this, it cures both. And that's a strong, strong allure.
You're absolutely right. And, and to kind of reel back into to what you were saying and to the first responder audience that is generally the majority of the audience of the show, is a lot of times people will say, well, your job's stressful. No wonder you have these issues. But I find, and this is true, this was my story, so I can only speak for me, but I can also speak for people that I've spoken to, is that my problems didn't start with the job. They started from childhood. Mm-hmm. They were issues that started long before I ever got on an ambulance or a fire truck. Mm-hmm. And I find, and I realized this years later, and if you listen to episode 1 of this show, people will hear my story. And I talk about that, a couple of years ago, through the recovery process, I realized that I actually became a rescuer because no one was there to rescue me when I dealt with the stuff I dealt with as a child. Yeah. And I didn't know that, but it's that subconscious underlying thing. And I think that's true for a lot of first responders. They're type A. They're very, I don't want to say everybody, but the majority of them are very type A and very, sometimes rough around the edges,
right?
to put it kindly.
Yeah.
But really and super, super good at taking care of others. Yeah. Terrible at taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, there's an interesting theory, and I'm not going to get into it because I don't know it well enough, and I'll butcher it. But anybody listening, and yourself included, can easily find it. It's called the drama cycle. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
No, I don't think so.
And part of the drama cycle is, so it says there's 3 types of people. And again, I'm not going to get into it because I'll screw it up, but they're one type that obviously we gravitate towards is the rescuer. So this idea that if I can help others through helping others, I can feel less crappy about myself, right? I can feel better about myself. I can feel anything. And I think, and I'm just making this connection now, so, excuse me if it's a little bit jumbled, but I think what happens is our basic human tendency to want to help others becomes completely magnified when we get a uniform that is telling us where to go to do that, right? And we're rewarded culturally for doing that, and that's maybe we use societally, if that's a word, instead of culturally there, because we really are glorified in being these helpers. So it's just then I get buried in my work, I get buried in my job, because at least there I get glory for helping others, and I can continue to ignore myself, right? So it's looking at how that's a basic human reaction or want or need, and then looking at how this role as a first responder actually magnifies this, so that it creates this we can create this aura about ourselves, you know what I mean? And I think we can see this at least in fire, right? When you get your first T-shirt, and you wear that everywhere, right? You wear that to every single thing you can do. I mean, it's different for police for obvious reasons, but you wear it to everything. And I think that speaks to the cultural piece where we're glorified for being helpers. And it gives me an identity, and getting back to what we talked about with the culture, right? It gives me an identity. And once that identity is gone, man, it's hard to get it back. It's hard to finally be accepted and then be on the outside and try to get back in. And I think that these are pieces of the puzzle that are often overlooked for us.
Well, and to jump on that point about the identity is, I believe it to be very true. It was very true for me, and I try to speak from that place because I live in my body more than anybody, and I know my experience. Yeah. When my identity was lost, when my career was over, just fast, my connection with people I work with, all that stuff was gone, and I had placed, what little self-esteem that I carried around in that identity, and when that went away, everything was gone. And what I tell people, I was with a couple people last night, a guy and girl who were struggling with some things, and they wanted me to do a little bit of counseling with them. And I spoke to them, and he said, well, I want to be with this girl. It was like they split up or whatever, and they're trying to work out their things. And he's like, I just, if I had her, everything would be fine. I said, well, let me ask you this. What happens if she died tomorrow? Then what?
Yeah.
Or if I had this job, or I still had this, I was still a firefighter, or I still had the Ford Mustang or whatever. If you put all of your stuff into one something external, and that external thing goes away, as all external things do, then what?
Yeah, it's an excuse, right? And that's a hard thing to tell somebody, because they want to make it something else, right? And this is, again, a human tendency. This isn't any one population specific or otherwise, but the tendency for me to try to find out why things screwed up, other than looking at myself, is so strong that I place something on these, podiums that become impossible to reach. And I tell this to people all the time, and it's so hard because obviously there's a cycle, especially when we get into homelessness and stuff as well. But it's a cycle where, in first responders as well, like if I'm a first responder and I apply for, workers' comp, in my workers' comp isn't for 4 months, my meeting or processing, I have to literally keep myself sick for 4 months, right? Because if I'm well at the end of 4 months, they're not going to say, well, what do you need the money for? You're doing fine. And
yeah.
So I got to keep myself sick, right? And I see this in my day job. I see this as the way we've set this thing up for, the population bigger. But it's like, if I could just get a job, if I just have my job back, and it's like, you know what? I understand that you grew a lot of your identity from that job, but I can tell you right now, something wasn't working, man, because you had a job and look where you ended up. So it's obviously not the job, right? And
yes,
trying to open people's eyes to that, and it's an interesting landscape to navigate.
It really is, and I'm thankful that there's guys like you to help navigate it, because that we need people like you to do it. And since the show started, I get a lot of messages from people in other countries, Australia, Ireland, and other places, and it's exciting for me. And what really interested me is I got a guy in Australia contacting me saying, I love the show, I listen to it every day, whatever, and it really helps me. And I said, dude, that's awesome. Thank you so much for the support. It really means a lot that, this is reaching people on the other side of the planet. And I said, would you mind sharing it on social media? And he says, oh, I can't do that.
Right.
I said, why not? He goes, because my job will be on the line. My job will be on the line. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, if you think the stigma or the problem, the negative attitude towards mental wellness issues, I'm saying it already. If you think it's that terrible in the United States or even Canada, it's a million times worse down under.
Right.
And I said, whoa, that tells me that we need to turn the microphone louder. We need to write more powerful content on social media, and we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, my my sense of humor says you pack your bags and go down under, do a show from Australia. But I hear it, and that's actually surprising to me, and I'm going to pay more attention to poke around on that end of the planet to see what's going on. But it's so surprising because the very thing that would break the stigma is the very thing we can't bring ourselves to do. Like somebody's got to be the bell ringer, and yeah, it's frustrating when I hear things like that, right? But and you still hear it, and you still hear it here. I still hear it here. It's not surprising to me in well-meaning people, right? It's not surprising for me to hear, what do we need this for? What's the point? It's not an operations issue, right? So a lot of the paid on call, I say volley, so it's a bit different than down there. We're paid on call. It's not an operate. We can't afford that. We got to buy new trucks this year or whatever. And I said, if somebody's so unwell that they can't drive the truck, that's an operations level issue. And, but I think it's just people are too afraid, right? They're too afraid to crack the veneer to suggest that, maybe I am not a superhero.
Well, and 2 points I'm going to make is that, yes, we need to have the bell ringers, and people like you and I are. And I knew that I had to be when I lost everything, and I needed to find purpose in my life. And I realized that all that stuff I went through and all the loss gave me the opportunity and the perfect platform to be able to connect people, because I could share very openly and honestly about how bad it really was, because I have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lose my job on an ambulance anymore. I already did that. Yeah. So I can freely talk about, going in the grandma's house and stealing the pills out of her bathroom.
Right.
I can talk about that. And that's what's, that's what it takes. That's what it takes. And something else you said about people are afraid, and you're right. And one thing I heard years ago, is a philosopher from, I believe, the early 1900s. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer said that all ideas go through 3 stages. They go through the first stage, which is ridicule. The second stage is drastically opposition. The third stage is where it serves as self-evident. And I think we're at that place where we're in the somewhere between ridicule and drastically opposed. However, with events that are happening, especially down here in the United States, the thing that happened in Las Vegas the other day, and other major, natural disasters that are happening, and more suicides amongst first responders, and line of duty deaths, and more cops getting arrested, and firefighters getting arrested, and whatever. Unfortunately, the sad part is more of those things are going to have to happen for people to open their eyes.
Yeah. And
it's a shame, because a lot of people are going to get lost in that shuffle, unfortunately. Yeah. But somehow, through the work that you're doing and others like yourself are doing, and I'm so happy to be able to have this show. I'm so proud, and it's not about ego, believe me. When I just went to the bank about 2 hours ago, and I opened up a business account, because I started, officially started made myself an official business. Right. And, the lady's asking, what is it? I said, I'm so excited because I have the only show in the entire world that I know of that is addressing these issues on a regular basis. Mm. And that's crazy to me, because I also remind myself that it wasn't that long ago that I was in a gutter sticking needles in my arm. But that's the thing. It gives, anybody, no matter where you are, as long as you're breathing, you have a chance to take your gifts and change the world with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. Obviously, and I'm not sure if you go through phases like this, but I certainly go through phases where things, and maybe this is the first responder in me, but I hate waiting for other people to do stuff, and that's largely what this business is about, right? Especially the word of mouth.
Yes.
Because of how closed off our cultures are. But sometimes I just get disheartened and I think, what's the point? I'm writing, but who's really reading it? And, I'm talking to folks like yourself, and who's really listening, and is it making a difference? Is there stuff left to do? And then, a couple of weeks will go by and I'll get an email from somebody saying, and I had 2 today, so-and-so struggling. What do I do? And it blows my mind, but it's also a reminder, because in my head, right? And again, this is maybe that rough-edged first responder you're talking about. I say, what the hell do you mean? What do you do? Like, it's clear, right? And I had to take a step back and recognize that I'm playing for a team that's pretty small at this point. And I think that we're loud, but we're still pretty small, and not everybody really gets it yet. And to me, that's both super humbling when people trust me enough to tell me those things, but it's also a little bit disheartening too, because like yourself, I mean, I work my ass off doing this stuff in most of my spare time that I can. And you're just like, oh, like, why am I still having this conversation? I should be having a different conversation by now, but I still got to explain the difference between a flashback and a memory. Or I still got to explain the difference between depression and PTSD. I'm like, we've brought the awareness to a point where we need actual people to go in and explain it now to folks. And the media is both phenomenal for shining the light on it, but also, holding us back a little bit by thinking that every single call we go on to is traumatizing folks. And that's taking away from folks that are actually traumatized, and it's showing respect for folks that carry the title PTSD. And this is part of a talk that I give often. I said, we're making PTSD to be the new OCD. And that's so wrong, right? Just because my desk is clean doesn't mean I have OCD. That shows how ignorant you are of what OCD is. And just because I have a bad memory doesn't mean I have PTSD, and so I'm fighting hard on that, and it's tough,
Well, it's funny. We're going to wrap it up in a second, but you just reminded me of something about how it's turning into the new norm. I was watching. I don't know if you've seen Curb Your Enthusiasm on HBO. It's Larry David, who is the creator of Seinfeld, has a sitcom.
Right.
And literally, I just watched it 2 days ago in one of the newest episodes, or one of the last episodes, I guess. And he said his friend's daughter was getting married, and she goes, "Oh yeah, he was a veteran from Afghanistan." And Larry David's character immediately says to her, "Aren't you worried about the PTSD?"
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
She, drop the microphone on that. That's how it's becoming, like the catch-all.
Yep.
And it's not. And it's unfortunately we're gonna have more sleepless nights keeping up, staying up and fighting this fight. But I'm glad there's someone like you up there up north doing it up that way. And dude, listen, we're gonna have to have a second interview. We're gonna have to do a follow-up on this.
Yeah, we just scratched the surface. I got like 1,000 things I want to say.
I know, and I have 1,000 things I want to respond with, because we could fight with we could do one of those too, and it'll be fun. So we're gonna do that. But before we sign off for this episode, I want you to share where people can find you.
Okay.
Do a little bit of promotion of yourself and what you're doing up there, so people can get in touch.
Yeah, for sure. So easiest way is either Facebook or my website. So my website is www.afterthecall.org. And my Facebook, I believe, is After the Call MH1. But if you type After the Call in, I should pop up there. My logo pops up right at the top. My email address is plastered everywhere, so I really encourage everybody at any moment that I can reach out, just email me. I make sure that all my publications, it's there to just reach out and ask your questions. The only other thing is I have a book that's for sale on my website. You can buy a digital copy, but if you are a hardened book lover like myself and want a hard copy, just email me and we'll figure out how to get it down to your folks down there. If I gotta fly it over that wall or whatnot, we'll figure that out too. And it's short and it's great for first responders and their families. So I go through some myths, how to have a conversation with, your partners or people at work, talk a little bit about suicide. And it's really the primer, right? So it's like 24 pages. There's pictures, so don't worry, you can look at those. And I think it's just a great place to start, especially when there's so many programs, people telling you what to do, people telling you what to say. Just read that, and it's it's really trying to get people more than just aware, but just active in the process. So those are kind of the three main ways to reach out to me. I respond to, I think, almost every email that doesn't look like it's soliciting me for a loan from some sketchy place, and I'm open to having a conversation with anybody about anything I've said today, or opening conversations up anew.
Dude, that's awesome. And I hope to get myself I am a hardcore actual book lover.
Yeah, I've got one.
So I definitely need to get me a signed copy of that for sure.
Will do.
Awesome, dude. It's been great having you on the show. Nick Halmasy, Ontario, Canada. Thanks a lot, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Absolutely. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. I really hope it'll help you or your loved one. If you get a chance, I really would appreciate it if you could head over to iTunes and Apple Podcasts and leave a review. It will really help me out in many ways. Take care, everyone, and remember, you are not alone in your struggle.
Give a big shout out to one of our supporters, the Addictions Academy. The Addictions Academy is the world's foremost accredited trainer of addiction coaches, addiction counselors, interventionists, and international master addiction coaches, offering on-site training at your rehab or facility, live virtual classroom webinars, or on-demand classes covering an extensive availability of courses and certifications. Check them out at theaddictionsacademy.com or call Dr. Callie Estes and her team at 1-800-706-0318.
Thanks for listening to Rescue the Rescuer. For show notes and more, head on over to rescuetherescuer.com.
We are a part of the Mental Health News Radio Network.com. This show is produced by James Healy of RecoveryInnovators.com. If you have a message and want to start a show of your own, contact him and let him know that we sent you.